What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the similarities between the Native Hawaiian culture and the Taino Arawak culture. The 5 topics we're going to cover today are going to be the similarities in agriculture, clothing, social hierarchy, weapons and tools, spiritual similarities. So firstly, speaking on agriculture and diet, we got to talk about the 2 super roots that are the central focus of each culture's diet and the entire reason for their agricultural system. The Native Hawaiians cultivated kalo, which to most people is known as taro, and the Taino harvested yucca, which is cassava to some people, but mostly just yucca still. These roots were both essential to their respective agricultural systems, the Native Hawaiian system being called the Ahupua'a, which is a district entirely built around agriculture that is made to sustain a specific area of the island. The Taino counter to this is called the Konuko, which would be a kind of sectioned off area of mounds and various irrigation sites that were used to farm and create more and more roots that kind of entangled all over each other and fed that entire area. In terms of sufficient fat and protein sources, both cultures were heavily reliant on the sea, as they did not have large land animals for most of their existence until European arrival. In terms of clothing, being in hot weather on an island, hopping in and out of the sea, you're not really going to be wearing too much. And so most men wore a simple loincloth. In the Taino culture, it was called the guayuco, and in the Native Hawaiian culture, it was called the malo. For women, they would wear a small rectangular loincloth called the nagua, and in Hawaii, they would wear the pa'u skirt. In terms of body decorations, we do see some similarities here, with Native Hawaiians having kakao, which is their form of tattooing, and you have the Taino culture, which painted themselves with hagua, which is a kind of like a henna, essentially, as that's actually where henna comes from. And this hagua was a resin from a rotten fruit that would turn jet black, and it would stay on the skin for an extended period of time. So although it wasn't technically a tattoo, it was similar. Now, in terms of social classes, both societies have a hierarchy that are centered around the chief class. In the Native Hawaiian culture, it's called the ali'i, and in the Taino culture, it's called the cacique. As with most cultures, once you reach a certain rank in society, there is a difference in clothing. So for the Taino, what that meant is that they would wear a mau for ceremonial purposes. A mau is a feathered cape that only the cacique class could wear for ceremony. The cacique could also wear headdresses made of parrot and red-tailed hawk feathers. In the Native Hawaiian culture, the feathered cape was actually much more prominent among the ali'i and was worn kind of regularly as a status symbol. This was called the ahu'ula. And they would also wear the mahiola headdress, which is that iconic crest headdress that you see Native Hawaiians wear. That is an ali'i item, and it was made from the feathers of the o'o bird, which unfortunately is now extinct. In terms of jewelry, the cacique class would wear more of what is known as guanin, which is an alloy made of various different metals, including gold, silver, and copper. It would have a reddish undertone, and this was much more prominently worn among the cacique class. And in the ali'i of Hawaii, they would not have access to metal for a long time until after colonization. Metal was not very prominent in Hawaii, but what they did have was whalebone, and so they would make collar necklaces of human hair and whalebone that signified their status as ali'i. Now, the commoner class for both culture, being the Naboria of the Taino and the Maka'ainana of the Native Hawaiians, these were your worker people, these were your warrior class, this was your kind of more involved in society class. Then below that, you have the priest class, which is designated to their priestly duties. So you have the bohike from the Taino culture, and you have the kahuna of the Native Hawaiian culture. But now moving on to weapons and tools, both cultures did not have an abundance of metal to work with in terms of making weapons with it, and the Taino really didn't have much interest in the metal itself. It was seen kind of like an heirloom passed down from generation to generation, or cacique to cacique, but it was not something seen as so prominent to make weapons out of. So therefore, they resorted to using precious stones, hardwoods, and various bones and teeth to make their weapons. Same thing with the Native Hawaiian culture. But going back to the hardwood part, they also both had a very significantly, spiritually significant piece of wood that was used to craft pretty much all of their weapons and tools. For the Taino, they had the guayacan wood, which I have mentioned before in another video, and the koa is what the Native Hawaiians used to make the majority of their weapons and tools. With these tools, moving on to our next point, they would carve out the semi for the Taino and the akua of the Native Hawaiians. These are the items, the totemic items, to represent the gods of respective regions and respective areas of each island. So in both cultures, their gods or deities were seen as exclusive to a certain group of people, or were anointed to a certain part of the island in order to kind of be the essence of that area, or of that cave, or of that wherever it is that the idol is. That is where the power, the essence, the mana of said deity was. Now, the Semisi, which is the religion of the Taino, and the Kapu, which is the religious code of the Native Hawaiians, both had heavy restrictions around certain practices that were only allotted for certain members of society, usually the chief class, or in some cases even separated by gender. Both cultures, obviously being tropical islands, did have a heavy reverence for the ocean, and the ocean was a big part of their society, as it was seen as life itself. Water is what, not hard to conceive why that would be, but yes, water was a very important part of how they viewed the world. And given that they were so spiritually connected to the water, they had to create things to go across large stretches of water. The Taino creating the canoa, which in some cases could have up to 100 people rowing a single long canoe. And this was used to go from island to island up the chain of islands in the Caribbean, and potentially to parts along the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, Georgia, and the Yucatan Peninsula, as well as the rest of the South American northern seaboard up there with the Caribbean Sea. Canoa varied in size but did not have any denominations between large and small canoa. They were just called canoa. Now, for the Native Hawaiians, it's a little more impressive, I must admit. The wa'akaulua is a double-hulled canoe with a sail on it that was used to go across the stretches of the Pacific Ocean. Keep in mind, they did not have GPS, they did not have anything we have today. And they made it across the Pacific Ocean and found every single island that lays out in the Pacific Ocean. That's pretty impressive. The wa'akaulua is very significant to the Hawaiian people, but also to all Polynesian cultures. In the Native Hawaiian culture, they did distinguish between large and small canoes, as they had the wa'akaukahi, which was an outrigger canoe. It's a very popular sport, actually, in Hawaii today. And with that, that's all I got. Thank you again for watching. Hope you learned something. Stay tapped into your roots. Ashe.